Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Formula Podcast. Don't worry, your ears do not deceive you. I am not your friendly host, Trevor Carlson. My name is Jeremy, and I'm the producer of the Formula Podcast, filling in for Trevor on this introduction while he's on an airplane to Hanoi, Vietnam. Today, I'm excited to share with you a conversation Trevor had with Eric Englemann. Eric's the founder of the company Geonetric and the executive director of the new Bohemian Innovation Collaborative, aka NewBoCo. In this episode, they talk about new perspectives that traveling abroad creates, finding what your passion is and whether that should be your job, and entrepreneurism and if it is the right choice for everyone. I'd also like to point out a reoccurring theme I've noticed with many of Trevor's guests on the importance to just start and see where the path takes you. And now, on to this episode with NewBoCo's Eric Englemann.
So we were talking about, before I got the mic out, how some of the stuff that you brought, what'd you say? You brought a bag each for you and your family and your kids, suitcase plus a backpack, and then you decided to ditch half of it at some point in time. You want to kind of share that story again?
Sure. Yeah, we're going on this trip, and we have Costa Rica in the summertime, and then we had England in almost the winter time. So we thought we had to pack quite a bit. So each of us had a rolly backpack or a rolly bag and a backpack. And when we left, we packed it pretty much full with everything we thought we'd need. And that felt like not very much, going from a house with all the stuff you got down to that. But about a month into the trip, by the time we were in New Zealand, we dropped like 3 trash bags full of extra clothes we just didn't need at the local Salvation Army there in middle of New Zealand. And just realizing how little you really need to get by was quite the realization.
So what we're talking about is the trip that you and your family took. Now, I don't want to butcher the story and mess it up, so I'm gonna let you kind of fill everyone in. So welcome to this episode of The Formula with my friend and somebody I feel like I've known for. I was trying to figure out how long I've actually known you. It's been quite a while, but yeah. So I'm with Eric Englemann, the executive director of NewBoCo and founder of Geonetric, as well as a laundry list of other things that he's got his hands in. So, but we're going to talk about all that, including travel, how that really affected, him personally and professionally, how it's really changed his approach to, what they're doing here at NewBoCo. And, I'm kind of curious. I didn't really get a chance to talk to, we talked in December after I got back from a short trip, about 4 months, but I'm curious because I feel like that maybe some of those things that we talked about then have changed a bit. But tell me a little bit about, or fill us in about the trip that you and your wife and family took.
Well, yeah, as you know, entrepreneurship is a wild roller coaster of misery and excitement and pain and exhilaration. And I had put my wife and family through that for 15 years. They're kind of on the roller coaster, whether they asked to be or not. I had started my first company before my first child was even born. And so, having kids in the middle of that when you're building a business puts a lot of strain on them. So I remember being in a car, God, it had to be about 12 years ago now, with my wife. We're driving somewhere, I don't even remember where, and we were talking about why are we doing all this crazy stuff? And we'd come up with this idea that we would want to travel. That was sort of like, why go through all this pain of being an entrepreneur? And it was like, well, we want to be able to do stuff maybe that's unusual. And travel was the thing. We both had a travel bug for a long time. We both had done a fair amount of travel. So we had this idea we would travel for about a year with our family when they reached a certain age. And we had chosen the ages of right when our kids were in middle school on purpose, because that way they could travel freely. They'd be old enough to appreciate it, but young enough that, high school credits didn't really come into play. They wouldn't be missing key high school experiences, and middle school kind of sucks anyway. So we thought we'd take them out of school right there and do that. And that was the gist of the plan. We ended up doing something pretty much like that, right when our kids hit that age.
That sounds like I don't know. I have so many questions about this because I imagine that what you kind of thought it was going to be and what it ended up being were 2 separate things. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Maybe what your expectations were at the beginning, and if you have anything that happened along the way that you feel like stands out that maybe impacted your kids or your family or anything else really.
Yeah, I think we thought it would be harder than it was, for one. I remember when we left, we were going to Costa Rica first, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect, if it would be safe. I got a teenage daughter and a young son, and we're traveling around, and I don't know what to expect. I mean, what I had experienced was on TV for the most part. And, but I remember within a few weeks, just realizing the sort of fear that I had before I left, never felt it again. We ended up being gone just about a little over 8 months, and anywhere we went, we never felt it again. It was just this comfort of realizing we're a family. We're as safe here as we are in the U.S. It's not a thing. There were a lot of things that also were put into context. One of the other sort of interesting things was we were in, I believe it was in Singapore, when, I don't remember which of the awful shootings it was. It was probably the school in Florida. They had the school in Florida with the big shooting, and just realizing, that there's issues in all kinds of countries for safety and policy and the way countries are addressing that problem or not, if they even need to, because Singapore is about as locked down as you can get. And yet nobody there felt scared, and there are penalties for what it is in Singapore. But it was just this interesting contrast where, they had chosen a different set of policies, and then maybe it has different drawbacks. But I remember as we traveled, that sort of feeling of safety that maybe I originally feared never came back again. I never felt unsafe anywhere once we'd sort of dealt with being gone from home.
And do you think that feeling kind of came back with you when you returned to the U.S.?
No, not really. I mean, I think it was a feeling that every country has its strengths and its weaknesses and its places of safety and less relative safety. But in average, everything's really, really safe. At least everywhere we were going was really, really safe. So,
what do you think was? I'm curious. I'm trying to ask some like unorthodox questions that maybe somebody hasn't already asked you. So I'm thinking about, what is something that you really expected to happen, or you thought would happen along the way that didn't, or something that maybe on the flip side, something that you had no idea would happen or you didn't expect would take place and did during your travels. And this can be either family dynamics, personally or professionally.
That's a couple of sort of ideas floating around. I think one of the things was that in retrospect, it seems really obvious, but I didn't think about it before we left, was realizing what it's like to be a family of four, that before we had left, in the U.S., we're all at work, we're at school, we're living our own lives, say hello at night when we get home, have dinner, whatever. But what it's like being crammed in an Airbnb, all four of you, all day, every day. There's nowhere to go. You don't separate, you don't go to work, you don't go to school. And so you're together all the time. And I guess partly I didn't realize, all right, we got to get used to that. There was an adjustment period. But once we did, there was this bonding that happened that I think will be something that I will treasure forever. We got to know each other in a really deep way that I think in this normal American busy lifestyle, we just wouldn't have. Seeing my kids feeling confidence by walking into a train station in a random country with a random language. I'm thinking of Japan at the moment, where they can't read the signs, or maybe can barely read the signs because my daughter does a little bit of Japanese. But like, they're cool, they're comfortable, they're ready to go, and then watching them blossom like that was cool. Like, the amount of confidence they gained was incredible to watch.
So I'm thinking of like two scenarios. One where you have that, because I'm kind of familiar with the feeling you're talking about. I didn't have a family with me or anything, but where you kind of are just like, you can't escape the people around you, which is, like you said, it's probably a good like bonding and growing experience. But then on the other side, you kind of get to see them grow up and see them. I mean, it's like this: if you can get dropped into a random country and figure your way out, or figure your way to somewhere, you can probably pretty much do anything at that point, So, and I think just on like the intentional side of things too, or maybe not intentional, but the spending quality time. It's one thing I noticed when I came back. It's so easy to, like, when I spend time with family, they're like, let's flip on the TV and we'll watch a movie together. And I'm like, damn it, I want to know what the hell is like. I'm like, Dad, I'm 31 years old. I'm like, you've been doing this shit a lot longer than I have. Help me out here. I don't know what I'm doing. And so it's easy to just like kind of let those moments pass by. But I think maybe when you're traveling and stuff, it kind of forces that a bit, because you can't really escape each other as easily as you can when you have your routines and stuff at home.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You have your routines, you have your places, you have your favorite easy chair, you have the TV show is coming on or whatever that you like to watch, and it sort of dominates. But when you're in a country where you're in Chiang Mai, Thailand, they had this very a beautiful but uncomfortable couch, and the TV was there, and we would try to watch TV in languages we didn't understand, but we could hear the word Trump every fourth word and understand, like, I'm not sure what they're saying, but it sounds not so good. But just trying to, it ruins the, in a good way, like it ruins the sort of dynamic that you have, I think, at home, and it makes you interact in different ways that I think are very powerful. At least it gives you the opportunity for a different conversation to emerge and different opportunities and experiences to emerge, for sure, when you're overseas.
Yeah, and it felt, I don't know if you felt this way, but I know that when I was in different places, it would almost feel like my awareness was heightened for what I was doing. So sitting and watching Netflix on my laptop or on my phone, I felt like I was, I was aware of like every minute that was ticking by, because maybe it was like a brand new place and everything is like, everything just really stands out, like things to do and stuff you've never seen or heard of before. So to me, it just kind of, I was just like, oh, this TV show is cool, but man, there's like I'm thinking of Prague, like exploring old town, or like Letna Park. It's like this beautiful experience, and so sitting and watching Netflix maybe isn't quite as exciting as that as well. So as you kind of, when we were talking before, you said you kind of ramped up a bit with work before you got home, and you said that well, maybe we haven't talked about this, but the some of the changes that kind of came out of you traveling and seeing some of these other places. Do you want to talk a bit about, professionally, maybe some things that you learned along the way that you've kind of brought back and maybe started implementing?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things that came that were not at all what I expected. So for one, I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years at the time when we went on this trip, and I had this vision that I would spend all this contemplative time writing blog posts or, I don't know, book something. And I said, I'm just going to let my mind go wherever it goes and write whatever it decides to write. And for whatever reason, it decided to go learn how to write software, which I still don't quite understand why my brain went that way. But it was this fascinating challenge to reacquire skills that I had 20 years ago. Because that was not what I did in my job. I don't write software for a living, although people I work with do, and they're much better at it than I am. But it became this challenge, and it was kind of a all-consuming challenge. That in all the free time, we scheduled a lot of time for individual learning on whatever you wanted to do. That I would watch tutorials and learn things online. But around that, the pieces that I did do that changed, I think, what I learned as an entrepreneur and a business owner and as a leader. I met with a handful of folks around the world who were doing just interesting things and exploring what startup communities were doing in different ways. Not as many as I thought. I thought I'd have 20 or 30 really solid kind of connections. It was just a handful, honestly, and a lot of it was just observational. But I remember being in Wellington, New Zealand, and meeting with a friend of mine at one of the accelerator programs there and talking about what he was doing. And it was really cool the way that they had built their accelerator program to build startups that were focused on government-related technologies. New Zealand has a very highly functional, very well-operated government, I think, by any account. And they were investing heavily in technology to make their government operate better and more efficiently and engage with citizens in new ways. And just how well they had focused in just the little details around how they'd set that up and organized it was just really interesting to learn and watch and see. I think intellectually you can understand how focus on a specific industry vertical can be valuable, but just watching him talk about it and listening to him was really valuable as an example of that.
It's interesting to me. I haven't been to New Zealand yet. I would like to go at some point in time, but like the Scandinavian countries, Netherlands, I think the Netherlands kind of counts as a Scandinavian country. I'm not sure, but it's interesting how they've applied a lot of technology, and they seem to be very proactively working on improving their public processes and systems and whatnot, and their education systems as well. It's just, I don't know, it was very shocking to me to see a lot of that and be like, man, what is going on? It seems like how is it this easy? It doesn't make sense. And seeing a lot of that, I don't know, I felt like that, like, man, there's so many possibilities and ways we could be using that I don't think people have even thought of yet, or using software and technology. So it's interesting to hear you talk about how they did it there. Now, how are you kind of applying some of those things here then? So you said you saw that, but what does that mean for Cedar Rapids and Iowa?
Yeah, so we're in the process. So the original accelerator program that we ran from 2014 to 2019 has now ended its sort of first run with our first investment fund, and in 2020 the new version kicks up. So the intent of the next version of this program will take a lot of those lessons into account. Just as examples, the cohorts that we run through the accelerator will be much more focused on certain industry sectors as opposed to free-for-all, which was how we were doing it. We're going to have built mentor groups that are specific by industry sector and by the age of the company. So there will be early stage mentors and mid stage and later stage mentors as we do it, which we'd never broken out before. We learned a lot about investment strategy as we did it. We have a new venture fund that we're building alongside the accelerator that was going to be very, very different from anything we've ever done before, much bigger for one. But it also has the ability to follow on invest with companies, which is one of the other things we talked quite a bit about with some of the folks I met. So, I mean, really, it was, I think we saw that we were generally speaking on the right track with what we're doing. But the other was, maybe it was just the world's a big place and, you say that, but then when you go travel around it, suddenly you realize there's 10,000 cities just like Cedar Rapids, bigger and smaller all around the world. They're all having exactly the same problem. They don't have enough workforce. The companies are not growing fast enough. They want to build more and better entrepreneurs, and they're trying to figure out how to do it. And so, here in Iowa, I mean, I'm benchmarking against other communities in the Midwest, but really there's thousands of them around the world that are all competing and vying for talent, for entrepreneurs, for new ideas, and just realizing how much that competitive pressure and how much we need to up our game to play on a global scale. It's great to compete with Midwestern communities, but we're not just competing with Midwestern communities with software.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I mean, I'm part of the I don't think I actually have membership. I just drop in at one of these like co-working co-working membership places where they have one in like every country. I think it's Impact Hub is what it's called. And before I left, I assumed there'd be like some startups in a few different places and some stuff going on. But then you realize, you're going to all these places like Chiang Mai, Thailand. I went to like Belgrade, Serbia has a Impact Hub with startup accelerators. And you realize like everybody's kind of doing this stuff. And I think unless you see it, you kind of, like you said, you imagine that your competition is just like, oh, well, Kansas City's 4 hours away and we're kind of competing with them. But when you can go anywhere and work from anywhere, I think you're not really competing locally anymore. And I think that's going to be a big change for people moving forward, especially. I mean, can you imagine if they have like a distribution system where you can like ship products from like somewhere in Asia just to like the Midwest in a matter of 24 hours? Like,
change everything.
Yeah, it's like it's not that far out of reality, I think, at this point. But
there's, one of the things that I remember also in Singapore was just how coordinated things were. And Singapore is kind of weird. It's very, very small in terms of physical size, but I think 20 million or so population in that neighborhood, and it's really one giant city / country. And they had talked about what they were doing, and they're trying to foster startups and growth, and they're importing talent from all around the world. Anything to do with global trade is kind of their thing. And the coordination between the private and public sector was the part that was really interesting. They were building tax policy and other things to encourage investment in ways that were just coordinated, whereas it feels like it's kind of this weird patchwork in the U.S. of different tiny little things, and often uncoordinated, where it felt like they just had one monolithic go kind of approach. And it was kind of cool. It was awesome to watch and just see what happens when people are aligned around what they're trying to do as a community or as a country and get things done.
I have maybe a controversial thought on this. It seems so. I mean, I found myself around like a lot of different startup communities, and one of the things I noticed is a lot of the startups seem to be very like like social driven, social support driven. They seem to have like some type of aspect where there's some positive net effect on society as a whole. At least that seemed what it was like to me. And, when I think of a lot of those different pockets of people in the US, I feel like I see a lot of people who are standing out maybe as individuals and like, hey, I'm going to go do this thing. And and maybe it seems a bit more like everyone kind of wants to do it on their own almost. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how it appears, is they're kind of like, well, we're the best at this, we're going to go do it. And then you have another pocket of people that are like, well, actually we're in New York, we're the best at it, so we're going to do it our way over here. And we can't team up with you guys because you guys are, yeah. So maybe this is a common problem around the world as well, but it also seemed like maybe there's more of a cohesive, like, hey, we all have to get this done, so let's figure out how we can do it together, make it work. And maybe I'm out of my element here, but that was what my perception was a bit. Maybe you can...
Yeah, I don't know. This maybe is a little bit political, but it feels like in the U.S. we always foster competitiveness, and in particularly in the Midwest, where there's a lot of space in between people, and so there's a us versus them thing. Even 40 miles away in Cedar Falls and Cedar Rapids, or 20 miles in Iowa City and Cedar Rapids, as an example, there's this is ours and that is theirs, and we'll platitude some things about doing it together, but we don't really. Because everybody has their own groups that are focused on their local effort. That's what they're paid to do. Whereas I feel like, and this is just my opinion of being in Europe, there's a sense that, sure, the Germans focus on things that the Germans do, but they're part of the EU, and that's part of a relationship that they've got with these other people, and they have built things where they can collaboratively get things done, and they've just built things. They have social structures that are set up to do that. Whereas I feel like in the US, it's less common to do that. And it takes more will to overcome the sort of local inertia or local pressure to do things for your local tribe. The tribes are either bigger or less tribal at all. And I think I've observed that there too. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that. It's, I have the whole like us versus them thing. We could go down a whole other rabbit hole with that, but it's funny. That seeing, it's one thing I've heard a lot of since I've been back this last time. I don't think I noticed it before, but I've noticed it quite a bit. And I'll be talking with somebody and I'll be like, yeah, I was here, I saw this, I did that, it was really cool. They're asking me like all this stuff, and I was talking about actually, this might be news to you. I'm getting a place set up in the Netherlands, and I'm like, I'm really excited about it. I don't have to own a vehicle. I can just hop on a train. Like, it's going to be really cool. I don't have to worry about healthcare or anything. I'm excited. And I get this response, people like, oh man, isn't it just so great though that you're so lucky to be born in the best country in the world? And I'm like, and I never really know what to say, because I'm like, I do feel very lucky. I'm very fortunate, and I have a lot of extremely positive things. But I'm like, I understand what you're saying. Like, I understand what you're saying, and I'm just kind of, and then I'll be like, why do you say that? And they're like, well, like freedom. And I'm like, but most places have freedom. I don't know. Did you notice that, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And I remember my kids seeing it and realizing it and asking questions about it. I think Americans have a tendency to believe, either rightly or maybe, as we're saying, maybe wrongly, that they've automatically got the answer and they're the best, and everybody else just aspires to become like the U.S. And it's a national arrogance thing that I feel like we grow up with it. We're built with it. Of course, everyone wants to be like us. We're the only superpower left, and everybody wishes to be that. And then you go travel, and actually you realize nobody does. Nobody gives a shit at all. And there are things, the way that people do things in other countries are as good or better than what we do, and they're not pining to be like us at all. And there are things they admire and emulate, I'm sure, but the one of the examples of that that I remember realizing, this was in the Netherlands, was looking at the way that they built roads and the way drivers drive on the roads. They don't have really well-structured intersections everywhere. They don't have stoplights everywhere and stop signs, and it's not well marked. It's often kind of random. You have to stop and wait for somebody to go by before you can go by, and that's normal, and they've baked that in. In the U.S., or in Iowa, I remember there was a car accident, awful, that somebody died in a few years ago, maybe up by Springville or something, on one of those highways, 30 or 151 or something. And, the call was, well, this road is not safe because it does not have both lanes with a giant median in the middle and all the things in the middle. Like, the U.S. has created this belief that our way of overwhelmingly engineering things and having the government build it, mind you, is this best way to do things. And it's not to say that it's not the best way to do things, but I remember having this realization that the narrative that Americans are this rugged individual person and the crazy, overly governmental folks in the Netherlands, actually, it's not like that at all. In the U.S., we have this understanding that the government is going to do these big monster roads with overwhelmingly complicated and ultra uber safe things. And if anything goes wrong, it is the government's fault, as opposed to people just driving safer, which seems to be the answer in the Netherlands. Like, wait, you slow down, you drive slower, you drive differently. And it was just these realizations that we don't always have the best and the right answer. There might be other answers that are as good or better than what we've got. And that was just one that came to mind.
Yeah. I know. I always find it interesting though. I'm like, when we have these problems and, where I hear people talking about them, well, I don't know how we fix this. I'm like, well, somebody has to have figured this out somewhere. Like, just go find it. Like, if you go to these places, you're like, wow, the Netherlands used to have a big traffic problem. And I think one of the things that they sorted out was, they have trains everywhere, so there's less cars on the road. Plus, everyone owns like 3 bikes. Every city they go to, they have a bike in storage that they just pop out and ride. So they cut down the number of cars, which probably overall cuts down the number of accidents too. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't want people to think that I'm just like shitting on the U.S. or anything like that, because there's a lot of great stuff here. I love it here. It's just when you see things from a different perspective, you're like, okay, so why can't we just take that and bring it home and implement it here? Like, it doesn't seem that far-fetched to be able to implement these solutions or try out these things. So maybe somebody that's smarter than I will listen and do something about it.
Yeah, I remember describing, how my kids had changed when they came back. And, one of them was I noticed that they were really proud that they were Americans. But then I also felt like they were also maybe suddenly very clearly aware of where America was not maybe everything it needed to be, and there were places it could be better. And so, that was one of the reasons we took the kids on this trip at all. We wanted to expose them to things that they would see on TV, probably inaccurately, and let them just feel it. When you live in a town, and we were in Haarlem in the Netherlands, outside of Amsterdam. And, we don't have a car. We're walking everywhere. It's this beautiful town. It's safe. It's clean. It's very nice, very nice. And, they just get this vibe that, oh, there's people and they're perfectly happy and they live this other way and that's okay. That they would see that and realize this is as nice as any town in the United States. And that's okay to see that. I think maybe they expected that they would, observe I don't know, that America was automatically better. And so part of this was just this realization that they would observe it and come to that conclusion on their own, that they're from a country they should be proud of, but also a part of a world that has lots of different ways of solving problems, and being aware of that.
Yeah, you articulated that much better than I did. So since we're talking about the Netherlands, I'm curious as to, since you kind of saw how a lot of people in different parts of the world work and live, how that's affected your own personal work-life balance.
Probably less than it should have, to be honest. You have the probably fatal flaw that always working in some capacity, the mind is always thinking about the job. It's kind of all-encompassing, and that's a choice. I think there's people who really need to construct clean boundaries, and that's okay. I've always felt like I like to think about work even when I'm not at work. But I feel like the thing that maybe did change was just sort of understanding the way that people work around the world and the ways that they can collaborate to get things done. We were talking before about how the different people have found ways in countries to collaborate to get things done. When I came back, that was one of my big realizations. We were trying so hard to do everything at NewBoCo that we could do in our own little box, and realizing we sort of hit the boundary of what a little group of people could do without figuring out how to engage other people to help us. And so pretty much the last year, that's been the big thing that's changed, not so much like in how I work personally, but in how our organization is maybe attuned to other players and trying to say, hey, how can we work with this entity or that entity to get something bigger done that matters more because we collaborated to get it done, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I was I was wondering if you had actually, because we had talked about this before. I think we had coffee at some point, and you were like, "How do I?" He said something like, "How do I focus? Maybe not focus, but we were talking about work-life balance. You're like, how do I implement this better? Because I feel like I'm losing my international ways, for lack of a better way to put it. Yeah, and it's something. It's like so easy to get. I mean, I just don't think you're the type of person that on Saturday you're probably not going to go home and watch the football games in front of the TV and be like happy doing it. You're probably much happier, doing like you were just doing Coder Dojo with the kids. I feel like that's probably a lot more fulfilling to you than whatever, like I just don't see you being happy doing these other types of things. So maybe it's not a work-life balancing. Maybe it's just like this is what you choose to do.
Yeah, I guess in some ways that's not really fair. So I've kind of created a job that just happens to be all the things I love to do in my life. So there is that. I mean, I get to work with entrepreneurs. I get to work with kids learning, technology things. I get to work with leaders and companies as they explore, edge case territory of cool leadership ideas and strategies. So yeah, it might be a little bit different just because as a founder, you get the ability to choose some of those things. And, people say, well, you should do what you're passionate about. And, sometimes you can find a job and go get a job where you can do what you're passionate about. And sometimes you can build a company that solves a problem that you happen to be passionate about. And that's what I think NewBoCo is for me. It's perfectly aligned with things that I care about as an individual. And I think that also happen to matter in society at the same time. So it's sort of the dream case for me.
Do you think people should pursue what they're passionate about?
This, for whatever reason, seems controversial, or people like say, no, you shouldn't. So I think you should. That's just my opinion. But obviously, if whatever you're passionate about happens to also not put food on the table, then you have to find another answer, But I think for most people, you can find a way to scratch that itch, even if it's not 100% aligned. Picture the Venn diagram of what you're passionate about and, what you can do to provide for your family and get the lifestyle that you want. Some people are going to have them very closely overlapped. I feel like I'm in a position where I got lucky that that's the case. Others will be less fortunate, but I think there are options to move where there's overlap. And, the more overlap you can find, the better. But there's almost certainly some way to get there. Maybe you have to be creative or clever or wait for the right opportunity. But I think it's there for most people. And to the extent you can find it, I absolutely think you should.
Yeah, I heard somebody describe it as like, maybe not necessarily what you're passionate about, but what you're enthusiastic about. What you're like when someone's like, "Hey, do you want to go do this?" And you're like, "Yeah, let's go." Like that's the type of stuff you should be trying to figure out. So, I have like a two-part question. One is, how do you actually find what you're? Because I feel like I hear this all the time. Do what you're passionate about. How do you find what you're passionate about for one, and then two? Let's say you've now found what you're passionate about. How do you go about figuring out if you can make a go at it? From like a living standpoint?
It's a good question. So, on how you find what you're passionate about, I feel like, at least and I can only speak from my experience, but from what I saw, I was a business major in college, and my first job happened to be building websites at the time in 1997 because that was this one skill that I had that wasn't in my business school. And that was where I got my job. So my major was, at least at first, kind of irrelevant to my job. But it turned out that the combination of being, technology savvy enough to build a website or a web application and having a business major background and entrepreneurial interests then came together really nicely when you want to start a company that does websites for a living, which was what Geonetric did in the early days. For me, I don't know that I could have planned that. And I think that's the problem is people feel like, well, my passion is out here. And so I have this perfect plan that takes me to get to it. If they even know what that passion is, I didn't even know what it was. I mean, I doubt I would have been able to articulate at, age 20, 22, that I care about kids learning software and I like working with leaders and I like, technology and entrepreneurship. Like I wouldn't have known those things. So to some extent, you kind of roll with your life and find the things they maybe bump into you. And I often wonder if the answers that are what my passions are right now, if that's even like an absolute answer, like had I, for whatever reason, had a different path, if the answer would have just been different, So I think maybe to me, this sort of second part of your question of like, once you have them, how do you get there? I don't know that you have to necessarily create like this really concrete plan to get there. I remember being really relieved when I heard, I want to say it was the founders of Google talk about how they said something along the lines of, we didn't have a plan to get where we are today. We had no idea. Our goal was to build a better search engine, period. That was it. We like being $1 billion company that does advertising and all these other things. We had no idea. It was, we just evolved into it. So this idea that you can get started on something and start down a path and then find opportunity along the way is more important than the plan that takes you there. Because I feel like that's absolutely how, my life and my career have worked. I bump into something. The Coder Dojo stuff we did earlier today was a random opportunity where I think it came about when I took my daughter to one in Iowa City and just said, this is cool. We could totally spin one of these up in Cedar Rapids. And it became a passion. We've been doing it for 6 years now with a bunch of other folks in Cedar Rapids. And, it's a great way to give back and introduce kids to technology, and it's a passion. But it's not like there was some grand plan to get there. You bump into it, you try something, and then keep going.
Yeah, I'm thinking about I have to give a talk at a university here in a few days that I haven't prepared for at all, but I'll be fine. I was thinking about, because I asked them, like, what do you want me to talk about? I'm like, I just live out of a bag and I work from my laptop. Like, what do you want me to say? Like, I don't have anything profound, really, or at least I don't think I do. And they were like, well, we just want to know how we can be like you. And I was like, oh God, no, please don't do that. And I had this moment where I was like, you guys probably don't like most of the things that I do. Like the hobbies, I try a lot of stuff. And the reason I have the hobbies that I care about and pursue now is because I've tried a lot of shit and I haven't been good at a lot of it, but I've just kind of stuck with certain things I enjoyed. And I felt like over time I got better at them, and now I'm able to make some money with some of them. And maybe that's just part of it, is just being like, okay, well, and I feel like I hear Gary Vee say this all the time, where it's just like, pick something that you really like doing, kind of get used to being broke and not being very good at it at first, but then continue to pursue it in a way that eventually will allow you to do it for a living. So I guess to piggyback on what you said, pick what you like at this point in time. 10 years could be something different. And then just accept the fact that you're probably not going to be good at it right away. Because I'm sure that when you got started doing this stuff, it was like, well, we're going to try this out and we'll keep doing whatever works, whatever doesn't, we'll change. So keep going, try to figure out how to monetize it. Even as like if you decide to go down a business path, you're probably going to be broke for a while at first. And so it's like, you might as well do something that you're excited about or enjoy, and accept that those things are just part of it.
Yeah, I think that's true. The other possibility, though, that I don't know that we've said here is people can have a job that they tolerate / enjoy, but it's not the same as their passion, and they can do that on the side. It depends on what it is. It's possible that, your love for, I don't know, playing cello. Maybe my son plays cello, so I kind of make that up. But, you have a job as a doctor or a lawyer or a salesperson or a life insurance salesman or whatever. But on the side, you play your cello for free in the local orchestra, for example. I was giving a tour to some friends from Peoria that were talking about what it takes to make a strong community. And it started from the angle of entrepreneurship, because that's, where we start. But on our tour, I walked them all the way down to Theater Cedar Rapids. And my friend Katie is the executive director there, and she met us for a few minutes and talked about how, they're one of the a handful of these that really has this massive volunteer group. The actors and in the plays and whatnot don't get paid. They all volunteer. They have paid staff. There's all the other stuff. But like the actual people who are passionate about being in the plays, and there's people on our staff who are those volunteers, and that's their passion. They have this side passion for theater and music, and that's how they scratch that itch. But they have a job that I hope they also are passionate about. But even if they're not, there's other ways to get that done too.
Yeah, I don't think there's like a one size fits all way to do it. It's not. I don't think either one of us would say like, all right, just quit making money and go do something, and just go do what you're passionate about. It's more like, figure out how you can keep a roof over your head creatively while pursuing things that you love and enjoy.
And I think that's maybe one of the things I've really admired about you as I've gotten to know you. You have this desire to travel and try new things. You're always a little bit of a free spirit for as long as I've known you. But, you figure out a way to say, well, I'm going to go travel and I'm going to do this podcast and maybe some other freelance things on the side. I don't know. As you said, everybody has to find their own path. And it's interesting to watch how different people get there. And it's been interesting watching your path as you've figured out yours.
I don't know if I figured it out yet or not, but it's just, I'm having a really good time doing it. Yeah. And I mean, I did the 100th episode. This will come out after that is released, but 100th episode, I did that. I don't remember when I recorded it recently. And, Kat interviewed me and she just asked me, like, basically if I went back a few years and kind of like mapped all this out, she's like, what would, if we could go back and talk to you, then what would you have said? And I was like, oh shit. Like, there's no way, like, if you would have told me that I would have tried half the things I have now, I'd have been like, you're full of it. Like, get out of here. But I don't know. And that's why I say people probably shouldn't do things the way that I've done them, because I just am maybe a little reckless and maybe a bit, maybe I don't think things through as much as I should ahead of time. Maybe you have a couple stories from that, but yeah, it's so whatever works for you really to find your thing. I think trying a lot of things, testing things out is a good way to do it. Because I don't feel like I get a good understanding of if I personally, I mean, there's some stuff, but I don't, for the most part, I would say I don't know if I really love something until I try it, or if I absolutely hate it. Same with travel. It's like, I would never recommend a lot of people to travel the way that I do. I do it very, I can handle very low comfort and I don't mind it. I kind of find it to be fun. And I would never be like, hey, Eric, you should go stay at this place that I did. You get to sleep on the floor. It's really cool. You'll really enjoy it. Because I think that it's not for everyone.
That's very true. In fact, I remember a time on our trip where we realized, okay, that's the bottom of what we're willing to accept as a family. We had a incident at an Airbnb, let's just say, that we were unhappy with, and it was just like, okay, that's just not. We don't have to stick to $100 a night. We can maybe make it $150 a night because it was just not working for us. But the other piece that what you just said made me think of was how different experiences are for different people and how you can't predict what people are going to enjoy. We were on this train somewhere in the middle of Europe, sitting next to this couple from the US, and they were talking about how awful Berlin was. And they were just like, we went there for 3 days and then we just like left because it was awful. And we're like, well, that sucks because we're going to be there for like 10 days and, a couple weeks from now. So we kind of go into it thinking, oh, Berlin's going to suck. And we got there and we thought Berlin was phenomenal. Like, oh my, I could totally live in Berlin. And so what it really hit for me was just how either random serendipitous luck or your personal preferences or any number of things can affect it. We were in Ireland. Sorry. What's the name of that place? It's a castle in Scotland, on the East Coast. Edinburgh, Scotland. Oh my God, I'm sorry. Brain. We were like, everybody's talking about how amazing Edinburgh is. And the day we got there happened to be miserable, like 32 degrees, wind howling, and it rained. And like, I was just like, I can't wait to get out of this town. I mean, it wasn't anything with the town. It was just the way the weather was that day informed how we perceived it. And so anyway, the point you were making about how everybody can experience things differently and love and hate different things is so true. You just have to try it. You just have to try.
Yeah, it's like, I swear I have this conversation all the time. It's like, I don't know what I'm passionate about. I don't know what I want to do with my life. And I'm like, okay, what have you tried? And I'm like, well, I have my job now and I volunteered once. I'm like, dude, of course you don't know what you're passionate about. You tried 2 things. Like go do some stuff, even if you think you don't like it. And you might find other opportunities that stem from it that you do end up enjoying. It's same like with travel. I mean, some of my best stories that I have are where, I mean, couple of my all-time favorite stories started out with, well, I'm packing a bag for the weekend. I'm doing a little weekend trip out into like the jungle or mountains. And then I end up living out of that bag for like 2 weeks and, like washing my clothes every day. And it's not that's definitely not for everyone. But for me, I just felt on top of the world. I had my laptop with me. I could work because there's Wi-Fi everywhere. And also have Google Fi. So if you're going to travel internationally, get Google Fi. And also hit me up for a referral code so I can get some cash on that. But it's it's kind of like, if I would have said no, like if I go out on this weekend trip and I'm like, and I met a friend of mine and she was saying she was going off to this other place, invited me to travel with. And if I was like, no, I'm not sure if I want to do that or not. I'm just going to say, because I don't know. Like I would have missed out on like 2 weeks of the most amazing time I ever had. And I learned a lot about myself, about what I do and don't like in those 2 weeks. Things that, I'll never do again, and things I'm like, yeah, I'd definitely do that. So I think it applies to like business, personal life, travel. You just got to try stuff. Like if you're listening to this and you're thinking about, Eric's got it so easy, man. He's got his passion figured out. It's so easy for him. It's like, well, Eric, how many things do you think you tried before you found like you got to this point where you feel like you're excited to come to work?
Lots of things, and certainly there were things that were tried along the way that just didn't turn out to either be enough to care to continue. And some of those were just little projects and pieces of things, but, tried for a little while, some woodworking stuff, and realized really quickly that was not for me, just as an example, right? You can imagine, how savvy I am with power tools. So, but yeah, I mean, I think your point is just right. And, I think people say that when you're going to college, they say, you don't know what your major is. That's okay. You should try a lot of things, join like student groups and student clubs. And it totally is true. I can sort of trace back through some of my stuff. I was the president of the economics forum at the University of Iowa one year. And it turned out that the thing they needed in 1996 was a website. And so I'm like, I'll figure it out. I went to the Memorial Union, bought a book on whatever it was at the time, and built a stupid little website with a spinning globe that had the email on it back in the day, right? And like, I had no idea at the time that would end up being like a little dab in a direction of where I would end up going. Had a job at the admissions visitor center as a student, and they said, well, hey, we need some help with our website. And I was like, well, in my student group, I just learned that thing. I could help you with this, and made little buttons that would mouse over when you clicked little things back in the day when that was fancy. So it was that idea that, just get involved and try things is totally true. It gets you everywhere.
So continuing kind of down the entrepreneurship business path, I mean, at this point, you've probably talked to hundreds, if not thousands, of entrepreneurs, whether that's people that have applied for the accelerator program or just people you've met. When somebody comes up to you and they ask you for, let's say they have an idea, something they want to do, something they want to get off the ground, I want to ask you, like, what do you tell them? But what do you actually wish you could tell them, and how would you get them to get their idea going? Like, how do they get from like 0 to 1?
That's an interesting question, because I feel like the answer is somewhat different depending on how they're approaching it. The most important, I guess, thing that I tell almost every entrepreneur in some way or another is the ability to step away from what you think the answer is and let data drive your decision making. And this is one of those things it's the equivalent of eat less and exercise more to be healthy. Everyone hears it, but no one knows how to make it a normal thing to do, because entrepreneurs pretty much by definition are so passionate about what they do that they see a path and they think it is the path, right? They can envision a path, and so therefore it is the path of what the customer wants or what the product is. And and I've fallen to that same problem myself of finding a path and then trying to go down it without letting the data guide me. And so like that's probably the most common thing that I see with entrepreneurs, and the most common advice, even well beyond the initial stages, is that because it's true even past the startup phase, it's permanent, of not letting your emotion drive your decision making, but trying to find data to guide those decisions.
Yeah, and I kind of want to piggyback on this, because this is something I feel like I learned more recently since I volunteered to do some like tech work or like online branding, marketing work for some humanitarian projects and NGOs. And one of the conversations I've had with one of those groups quite a bit, because they have like a humanitarian accelerator program, and coached a few of the teams, and we have this conversation where it's like, you're not actually like this thing. You're like a solution to the problem. Because a lot of it is like, oh, I'm going to build an app that does this, and I'm like, yeah, you're not the app though. You're the solution to their problem. So, and I think that kind of what you're saying is don't necessarily be like, yeah, we're going to make an app because we want to make an app. What is the data telling us to do? Is it that, maybe they just want an email delivered to them, or somebody they can email that'll do the work in the background for them, So it's kind of focusing that, like, don't be romantic about if it's an app, a website, whatever, a chat bot or whatever it is. Just remember that you're a solution.
Yeah, it's one of those sort of adages of fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And I think the trick is actually understanding what that means to you in your daily life. What does that mean as you do work on Tuesday when you come in and show up? How do you fall in love and stay in love with the problem and not the solution when you seem to be paid to create the solution, right? And so I think a lot of it is making sure that you're just listening to your actual end customer and end user, and not listening necessarily to what you and your internal team think at any given moment, that customer or that user is always there, and building that into the process. So from the get-go, because it's really easy to think once you see that path that you just scurry down and build something. And again, I've done that multiple times, even after giving this advice to people and then failing, because it's so hard to do. So yeah, I think we're on the same path with that.
Why should people not be an entrepreneur?
Why should you not be an entrepreneur? Well, for one, I think there's a place and a time in your life where you have to be ready for it. And, people will hear you describe it as a roller coaster, which I believe we've already done on this podcast today. The ups and downs and pain of being an entrepreneur is severe. And I've never seen an entrepreneur go into it and continue with it and not experience substantial pain and stress and suffering. And so I think you should, if you're not at a place in your life where you are ready for that and willing to face it and deal with it, you shouldn't. There are many ways to get by that don't require that level of stress and strain. And that certainly goes for families, because I think when you're a single person, you can kind of make those decisions on your own. And, maybe you feel that way sometimes. But then once, you're married or with kids and a mortgage, there is more than just you to consider in that calculation of when and where to become an entrepreneur, because they're on the roller coaster with you. So I think that would be certainly a reason not to. The other would be if you're not comfortable with the unknown. I think there's personalities that really like knowing what the next step is. It's very clean. They like always knowing what's next, and you can't know what's next. It's sort of the definition of entrepreneurship. And so I think if you aren't comfortable and enjoy the exploration, if you don't find joy in exploration, then it's probably not something you're cut out for. Yeah.
And I'm going to add one, because I feel like this has been a mistake of mine in the past of why I pursued some things. And maybe it's when you're trying to find some type of maybe validation personally through being an entrepreneur, or once I'm a successful entrepreneur, I'll be happy. So I know that I've pursued ideas or done things because my identity might have been tied into that, which is one reason why I haven't been working on anything for like my own product, because I think it's more important to be in love with the problem, or in love, like you are maybe obsessed with solving the problem more than you are being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. Although I'd maybe give you a little bit of a caveat, both for you personally and anyone on this podcast, that some of those might be learning experiences too that help you later to become who you are intended to become. I remember the first and really only job that I ever had before I became an entrepreneur. It was a small company. We were, again, doing websites early on when it was really early in the industry. And, I knew it was not the path that I wanted. Ultimately, I enjoyed that little company. But I got to watch a company being built from the ground up. almost. I mean, I was one of the earlier employees, and I watched what it means to grow a company, what it means to change direction, what it means as a leader to see the. I was not the leader. I watched the leaders, and I remember even in that time, one of the founders coming in and watching him spin the tale of where the company would go, and watch these 40 people just enraptured. It was this just the way he spoke to us and the way we believed in the vision, and I was like, wow, I totally buy it. You guys buy it. This is weird. Like, why? Like, it was just amazing watching that happen. And so this would not have been the path, I think, all things equal, I would have chosen, but I used that as a step in the direction I ended up going. So yeah, I think all of those things are kind of formative, even if they, you try that experiment and it turns out not to be the path you want, or you do something that you know is not on the path you want just for a while, it becomes a stepping stone maybe to something greater.
So if you could go back and talk to maybe how old were you when you started? 22? 24 when you started Geonetric. If you can go back and talk to 24-year-old Eric, what would you tell him now?
There's a long list. There's a part of me that wants to say nothing, because as I just said, you learn from all that stuff that you screw up, and I don't know what would have happened if we didn't learn those lessons the hard way. One would be figure out what recurring revenue is much, much sooner. That's the big one. The second would be don't be an arrogant ass, because I would say most of the mistakes that I've made and the poor judgment comes back to arrogance in some fashion or another. I thought I knew something and maybe didn't realize what I didn't know. And I still probably struggle with that today. The entrepreneurs have, I think, that problem generally, but I maybe have an acute case of believing my own bullshit sometimes when I shouldn't. And sometimes that's what maybe gets you through the hard times. But sometimes you have to, maybe step out of it and maybe look at your bubble from the outside and be willing to do that. The other one would have been, this was a lesson maybe learned way too late, was learn how to trust people. As an entrepreneur, it's often a lonely game, because you start from this position of you kind of get the ball rolling from 0 to 1, as you sort of pointed out. You get it going, and then you want to kind of keep it going. And you've trained your mind to think that inertia of the movement is because of you, when it's really not. In the beginning, when you're building a company or backing a company, it's about you're backing a person, an individual. But once it has any movement at all, you're backing a company. And the company means there's multiple people trying to accomplish the same goal. And I don't think early on I knew what it meant to really trust people to believe that they could accomplish what they needed to accomplish. And so I was probably a much worse early on, a micromanager, or much more focused on things that were unimportant, and much not focused nearly enough on trusting people to get things done of what needed to be done. And so if I could go back, I would learn those skills much earlier.
Now, something you said earlier that I'm curious about. You said that being an entrepreneur and getting started, and one of the reasons you shouldn't is because of like the suffering that takes place. I don't remember what else you said with that, but it was like that suffering piece. Do you think that's necessary? Is that something that 100% will be guaranteed if you decide to be an entrepreneur?
I don't think I can say it that way. No, but I've never observed an entrepreneur that didn't go through some massive stress that just comes out of nowhere. I mean, it's partly the definition of entrepreneurship. Like, you're trying to create something new that didn't exist before. And so almost invariably, there's something about it that there's a reason it didn't exist before, because it's hard putting the pieces together to work the way that they were. So I think the broader issue just is you have to be ready for it. I don't know that it's avoidable. Maybe there are. I'm sure maybe there's some entrepreneurs that just had a graceful and elegant process the whole time and figured it out and never made a catastrophic failure, never made the wrong hire and then lost sleep as they knew they'd go in the next morning and fire the person who had a family because they just weren't the right fit. But you hired them thinking they were the right fit. Or when you make a mistake and you don't renew the customer, or don't get the new customer that would have saved that payroll period, or whatever it is, like I don't know how you avoid all of those, but those are often the things that make you, I think, a lot stronger as a person, as a leader, though, as you work your way through those kinds of challenges. I don't think they're avoidable, but maybe with enough experience and the right mentorship, you could avoid most of them.
Maybe it's right to say you could avoid some of the extremes. All right. So I really appreciate your time coming by to chat. I know you're a busy guy, and we're doing dinner after this, so I don't want to keep Amy waiting for too long. So 2 quick final questions. One has to do with travel. The other is just, last message you'd like to leave the audience with about, intentional living. So travel-wise, I feel like a lot of people listen to or follow the show because of some of the digital nomad stuff that I do, for lack of a better, I'm still trying to find a better word for what I do, because I don't really hang out with other digital nomads. So I'm like, somebody called me a digital drifter, which I was like, wait, I don't know if I like that either. But so if, let's say there's some other business folks that are listening to this that are curious about, the impact it had on you to take the time off that you did to travel, what advice do you have for them as they're maybe considering doing something similar, or maybe you would, I don't know, whatever you'd like to say to them?
Yeah, so I've done a fair amount of traveling, both this big trip and then a bunch of smaller ones. And the thing that has been really helpful to me as I've kind of reflected on it is, in each of the cases, I had a problem that I wanted to have the answer to by the time I got back. And I left with that idea in mind. In one example, I went to Machu Picchu with some friends, and the question that I had and what I thought about while I'm walking by myself on the Inca Trail, as the slowest, fattest guy in the group, way behind everyone else, I had a lot of time to think by myself, was, do I want to leave my job as the founder of Geonetric and create some kind of nonprofit that works with entrepreneurs? Like, that was exactly what I was wrestling with at that time. And I knew I wanted by the end to say, I'm going to continue at the company, or I'm going to leave and I'm going to try this other thing. And it was huge. It was leaving my baby behind. I was leaving my company that I built to do this. And so like having that as the goal of the trip in a way informed everything else. On this bigger trip, it was kind of the same thing. It was, I've created this organization that works with entrepreneurs and does this technology stuff. Do I need to take it to another level, or can I just let it go and try something else now? And I wanted to come back and see whether I had fire for it. I was tired, like 5 years of a founder of a nonprofit. It was just like any other company. I was tired. And I think that the trip helped me reignite that passion and that flame, realizing as I saw around the world how competitive it was and the way other people were doing things. So I guess that would be my advice, would just be, leave with a question. Go on a trip with a question that you'd like to come back with the answer to, and it'll wrestle with it while you're awake and asleep and thinking as you do it.
And don't come back till you have the answer. Well, it depends how big of a question it is. So second question, when you think about, when you think about the decisions you've made and how you've really designed your life up to this point, what types of questions are you, do you ask yourself? Or I guess, how are you going about designing this next phase of your life?
That makes it sound a lot more intentional than I think it really is. I think maybe I'll build on a previous comment. I feel like what I'm doing now, I've observed, teams over the last 20 years building companies of different kinds, for-profits and non-profits and high tech and not. And, I've seen what groups of people can accomplish when they are focused on the same goal, and that goal is visible to them and they are trusted to go accomplish it. And so I feel like maybe this is what if I'm answering your question here, everything left that I want to do is all about building a group of people to go accomplish something badass and audacious and different and challenging that, nobody could do as an individual, and creating the place and a way for them to do that. Because this world has big problems and it needs big thinking, and it needs teams that can do that kind of stuff. And like that's maybe what motivates me for everything now is like, if you're not solving some problem that's meaningful and important, like go home. I mean, you can get a job anywhere doing anything, but like I want to do something that's exciting, that is hard and maybe on the cutting edge or at least close to it, that is connected and complicated and difficult for people to solve. And in order to do that, you have to build really powerful, high performance teams of people. And that motivates me.
Any last words for the audience? Maybe leave them some words of inspiration for whether it's, finding their passion, building a group of people to do some amazing stuff, or I don't know, whatever comes to mind.
Just go. You'll have opportunities to go places. It doesn't have to be overseas and the crazy trips that, Trevor and I tend to do. It could just be to see something you've never seen before. My mother will get in a car and just drive somewhere interesting to her, Black Hills of North Dakota or something, or the Grand Canyon or whatever, and she'll just drive and see it because she wants to see it. And I think that's something you can use as a general piece of advice anywhere. Just go.
Thanks everyone for taking the time to listen to this episode. Appreciate you tuning in. Now, if I can ask you for a quick 5-minute favor, go ahead and head over to your podcast player and leave us a review. Reviews help us to rise up in the ranks and people like you to find us. So, and as Eric pulls out his phone to give us a review. Take care, everyone, and I look forward to you tuning in next time.